before they did. That's what terrifies them. They thought they were keeping you in check while you were memorizing the architecture of the entire system. You smiled at their smugness because you understood how to extract value from dismissal. They thought they were ignoring you, but they were training you. Every slight, every overlook, every calculated attempt to minimize your presence was fuel, and you weren't simply absorbing it, you were transmuting it. You studied their moves like chess, not because you wanted to play, but because you planned to build a different board. That's what makes them tremble now. Not your words, not your rise, but the sickening realization that you predicted this moment while they were still pretending you didn't exist. You didn't need to announce your plan, you just needed time. Time is the one resource the arrogant always think they have more of, but you used it like a scalpel, carving, adjusting, analyzing. And the moment reality began to shift in your favor, they thought it was coincidence. They told themselves it was chance, maybe even karma. But the deeper truth haunts them now. You knew. The trajectory of this transformation was calculated. They weren't watching a miracle, they were watching consequence. And they're terrified because they now understand your silence was never passive, it was predatory, not in cruelty, but in focus. You weren't hiding, you were setting the stage. Reality follows your plan because your plan was written in defiance. Not loud defiance, but surgical, internal, meticulous rebellion. You defied their narratives without needing to argue. You made truth your compass and patience your shield, and the universe noticed, not because it favors the righteous, but because it rewards the prepared. The truth is, they were loud because they were insecure. You were quiet because you were certain. You didn't guess the outcome, you decided it. And now that it's here, now that everything is aligning in ways they can't control, they are no longer asking what you did. They're asking how long you've known. What they fail to comprehend is that visionary thinking requires isolation. You don't get clarity surrounded by noise. That's why you stopped explaining. You let them talk while you designed. You let them mock while you mapped. You let them sleep while you studied the fault lines. And now, the collapse they thought would be yours is becoming theirs. You never had a plan B because you refused to lose. Losing was never an option. It was a distraction planted by the timid. You wanted it more, not because of ego, but because you knew what was at stake. And that's the difference. They were chasing success. You were chasing alignment. They're terrified now because the wind doesn't blow in their direction anymore. The energy has shifted. You can feel it. So can they. The control they clung to is slipping, not because you stole it, but because they never earned it. Their dominance was borrowed. Yours is embedded. You didn't have to steal power. You became it. And the world responds to that kind of embodiment. When someone moves in total congruence with their vision, reality bends. People talk about manifestation like it's magic, but it's math when you're committed. Every action you took was an equation. Every move you made was a ritual. Now you walk into rooms with gravity, and they can't breathe right when you speak. Psychologically, they're spiraling, because nothing wounds the manipulative more than being outmaneuvered. They relied on your obedience. They needed your hesitation. But you removed both. You stripped yourself of need. You detached from outcome. You became so immune to distraction that every inch of your being aligned into momentum. And momentum is merciless. It doesn't stop to negotiate. It doesn't flinch at hierarchy. It rolls over the unprepared. And that's what they're facing now. Not just your rise, but the aftermath of your refusal to settle. They're not watching a competitor. They're witnessing judgment in motion. You didn't change. You arrived. You always had this version in you. They were just too invested in the old narrative to notice. And now, they don't know what to say. Their language was designed to handle rebellion, not replacement. They don't know how to defend against someone who no longer wants to be included. You're not fighting for a seat. You're building a new room. A room with different rules, different air, different value. You won't be deluded to make others comfortable. You are no longer here to be liked. You're here to be legendary. And that shift in purpose, that's the quake they feel beneath their feet. Let them squirm, let them rewrite their stories in real time, trying to explain how you pulled this off. Let them scramble to adjust their tone when they see your name trending in rooms they once gatekept. You didn't sneak in, you simply became undeniable. That's what happens when discipline outlasts doubt. That's what happens when you stop asking for permission and start acting like your bloodline prayed for this moment. You don't need them to clap. Their fear is enough, because fear is respect in disguise, and you've earned both. They fear your mind now, your foresight, the way you've made peace with solitude and turned it into strength. They're not intimidated by your success. They're haunted by the reality that you saw all of this coming, that while they were celebrating small wins and weaponizing cliques, you were preparing for an empire. You were building in silence so that when the spotlight came, it wouldn't change you. It would simply reveal what you always were. And now it has. You are not a disruption. You are a design whose time has come, and they can't stop what they didn't see coming. They thought you were standing still because they couldn't see the wires underground. They laughed at your silence, mistaking it for surrender. But you weren't still. You were studying. You were mastering terrain they didn't even know existed. They confused delay with defeat because they've never seen what patience looks like when it's backed by vengeance and precision. You weren't playing their game, you were playing time. And that's what they never prepared for. They only trained for applause, for optics, for short-lived victories that look good on a highlight reel but collapse under pressure. While they performed for approval, you built endurance. While they faked momentum, you built mastery. You didn't chase the quick win, you were designing the inevitable. They kept refreshing their feeds, looking for validation while you refreshed your strategy. They celebrated temporary relevance. You stayed up rewriting blueprints. They laughed because you didn't respond to their jabs, but you weren't playing for attention. You were playing for control. Every time they tried to bait you into a public spectacle, you stepped back into your silence. Because you understood, lions don't lose sleep over opinions of the zoo. And now they feel the consequence of underestimating someone who wasn't performing for the crowd. You played the long game. They played themselves. And now they're exhausted, while you're just getting started. They built paper kingdoms. You laid brick in the dark. They circled each other in ego-fueled alliances, but you stood alone and became undeniable. While they made moves for approval, you made moves that didn't need announcement. That's what bothers them now. You were never loud. You were deliberate. You weren't interested in being liked. You were building something that would outlive trends and outlast noise. They wanted moments. You were carving legacy. And they can't undo that, no matter how they spin it. You built something they can't compete with. Reputation, rooted in reality. Psychologically, they never left the sandbox. They believed if they controlled the crowd, they could control the crown. But they never realized you weren't after their throne. You were building your own empire, one invisible layer at a time. And now the walls are rising around you, and they're still trying to understand how you got here. You didn't. You waited, and in that waiting, you sharpened your mind, your brand, your discipline. You bled in private so you could never be humiliated in public. You broke in silence so you could rise without noise. They don't know how to process someone who saw every one of their games and refused to play. They played themselves every time they prioritized speed over structure, every time they chose attention over alignment. They threw themselves at opportunities they weren't built for, while you prepared for ones they couldn't even see. You didn't need shortcuts, you built stamina. And now you arrive at the same table, not rushed, not forced, but as a force. You walk in with presence, and their heads turn, not because you demanded it, but because now they realize you earned it. And they can feel the difference. Integrity doesn't need a megaphone. It just walks in and rearranges the hierarchy. They spent so long mocking the process they didn't understand, and now they're praying for the results they didn't earn. They talked while you transformed. They gossiped while you grew. And what eats them alive is not your success. It's the realization that you saw the board before they even realized they were being watched. You didn't just beat them, you predicted them. That's the sting they'll never recover from, because it means you never feared them, not for a second. You were simply patient, and that kind of patience, it unnerves the performative, it exposes the insecure. You were never trying to shine, you were trying to last, and now you've become what they can't mimic, sustainable impact. They change costumes, you change the conversation. They pose to stay relevant, you act and the world adjusts, and now they orbit you, hoping proximity will grant them the stability you bled for. But it won't, because you didn't just play the long game, you owned it. You operated with strategy they still can't decode. You knew that in a room full of actors, the truth teller doesn't have to shout. They just have to outlast. Now they watch you differently, less like a competitor, more like a consequence. They know they never truly understood what you were building. They only saw the outer layers, the discipline, the silence, the refusal to react. What they didn't see was the internal warfare, the lonely nights, the quiet betrayals you buried and studied, the promises you made yourself while they thought you were disappearing. You weren't disappearing, you were developing. You weren't reacting, you were remembering. And when you finally stepped forward, it wasn't to prove them wrong, it was to prove you were right to wait. They called it quiet because they didn't hear the gears turning. They assumed absence was absence because they never learned to fear silence. But your silence had rhythm. It had patience. It had layers so dense they couldn't even guess the depth. While they flinched at every shadow, you became one. You weren't talking because you didn't need to. You were building something so precise, so deliberate, that every second of your withdrawal was a calculated step forward. You weren't absent. You were arming. And now that it lands, now that the ground beneath their feet starts to vibrate, they realize too late. The sound they're hearing is not a warning. It's the arrival. They used to joke about you. Smirks across rooms, inside jokes behind locked phones, the occasional bless their heart laced with venom. But you were never deaf to it. You were collecting it, filing it under proof. They didn't know that every dismissal was feeding something cold and creative in you, the type of hunger that doesn't shout, it sharpens. They thought you were stalled, you were sculpting, and now, what they thought would be a footnote has become the entire damn chapter. Because when a silent architect finally unveils the blueprints, the sound it makes is louder than every insult they whispered. It's the sound of reckoning. You didn't walk into the spotlight begging for attention, you commanded it through execution. They thought attention was something you asked for, but you knew the truth. Attention is gravity. You build it, and everything around it shifts. While they went live on every move, you logged off. While they performed, you prepared, and that preparation wasn't glamorous. It was surgical. It was brutal. It was hours of refining while no one clapped. But now, the world echoes with your name. Not because you ask it to, but because thunder doesn't ask permission. It crashes, and you've just arrived. They're checking timestamps now, comparing their wins to your impact, but they can't trace your origin because your progress wasn't documented. It was designed, off-grid, off-radar, off-limits to those who never earned a front-row seat. What they forgot is that the most dangerous storm is the one you don't see coming. That's what eats at them now, that they can't predict your next move, because they never knew your first. And what they hear now, that's not applause. That's consequence echoing through the halls they once claimed as their own. You don't even have to speak now. The way you move speaks for you. Your results speak louder than their entire highlight reels. Their strategies relied on visibility. Yours relied on inevitability. And when inevitability shows up, people panic. You built momentum in the shadows so that when the spotlight came, you wouldn't flinch, you'd blaze. They thought thunder came from noise. You knew it came from pressure. And now every step you take sounds like a warning to those who never saw you coming, because they never respected silence. Until now. There's a terror that only a strategist can induce, the terror of being outplanned by someone who never needed a stage. That's you. That's the energy you walk in with, and it's why they stare, why they whisper, why they fumble when your name enters the room. Because they spent so long performing that they forgot how to prepare. And you spent so long preparing that now every step looks like prophecy fulfilled. That's why they're terrified. You didn't just return, you landed, and the impact rewrote the pecking order. Let them keep guessing how you did it. They'll never find the footage. There's no montage, no behind the scenes. Your journey was built in stillness, in the type of solitude that makes most people unravel, but not you. You grew teeth in the silence. You buried your fears and grew armor in their place. While they threw tantrums over timing, you were timing everything. You didn't need miracles, you built momentum. And that kind of momentum, once it moves, doesn't ask who's watching. It just moves through walls. It tears through illusions. And it doesn't. Now every room you enter feels different. You don't have to demand respect. The air changes when you arrive. They remember every moment they laughed, every chance they had to listen. Too late. Your plan wasn't just good, it was inevitable. You moved like a storm forming over years. Quiet, dense, relentless. And now the thunder hits, and no one can talk over it. They aren't just surprised, they're exposed because they bet against a silence they never understood. They bet against a presence that never needed permission. The difference is this: they thought silence was surrender. You knew silence was set up. They played checkers with loud moves. You played chess with hidden traps. They don't get to recover from this, because what's landed is not just your success, it's their irrelevance. You didn't chase their world. You built one they now orbit. And when they ask how, all you have to say is, I played the long game in silence. And when my plan landed, the world shook. Because thunder doesn't need a warning, it is one. You didn't flinch when they plotted because you had already mapped their next 10 moves. You watched them try to orchestrate your fall with the smug confidence of children holding scissors to a blueprint they could never comprehend. You saw the deception before they had the courage to voice it. That's what makes you dangerous. You didn't just respond to the chaos, you anticipated it. You moved through betrayal like you were rehearsing it, not surviving it. They thought you were shocked, but you weren't hurt by the knife. You were tracking its angle, and when it landed, you didn't scream, you smiled. Because their treachery only confirmed what you already knew. They were predictable, and predictable things are easy to dismantle. They underestimated what it means to see, not with eyes, but with understanding. You weren't guessing their intentions, you were recording them. You observed their tells, cataloged their excuses, and watched their patterns loop like a broken algorithm. They weren't evil, they were lazy. Lazy in thought, lazy in malice, lazy in how they assumed you wouldn't catch on. But you did, you always do. You let them talk, let them lie, let them build their fragile web of manipulation, thinking they were subtle. but their silence was loud. Their fake kindness was louder. And your silence? That was the loudest of all. The sound of someone who's waiting to strike with surgical timing. The most unsettling thing about you is that you don't need to react to prove you were right. You don't play their emotional games. You just wait. Wait for the house they built on deception to collapse. And when it does, you don't gloat. You document. Because power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks quietly through the wreckage of your enemy's arrogance and leaves footprints made of forewarning. They didn't believe you saw it coming because you never warned them. But why would you warn them? You were never trying to stop them. You were letting them hang themselves with their own performance. Psychologically, they're rattled because you violate their core assumption that people can't handle truth unless it's decorated. You didn't sugarcoat anything. You didn't give them the pleasure of denial. You simply knew. You knew who they were long before they took off the mask. You weren't shocked when the betrayal came. You were bored by its predictability, and now that your silence has expired and the world sees them as they truly are, their greatest fear has taken shape. Exposure in the face of someone who already calculated the aftermath. You weren't trying to be liked, you were trying to be accurate. They mistook your precision for coldness, but coldness doesn't cut like this. Coldness doesn't devour lies with grace. You didn't just see the truth, you built your world around it. And now that it's undeniable, they want to shrink your presence, rewrite the narrative, bury the timelines, but it's too late. The prophecy they ignored has become the platform you stand on, and now their scrambling is just background noise. Static beneath the frequency of someone who saw the whole storm on the horizon and never blinked. You're not dangerous because you fight dirty. You're dangerous because you don't have to. You walk into war like it's a second language. You sit at the table with those who plotted against you, and you serve them the dish they tried to cook, only yours is seasoned with foresight. That's why they tremble, not because of what you did, but because of what you allowed. You allowed them to write the script of their own demise. You gave them the space to act freely. And now that the curtain falls, they finally understand. You were the director all along. They always assumed that intelligence meant being louder, faster, flashier. You proved that real genius is in restraint, that the deadliest weapon in the room is the one that never needed to be drawn. You let them believe they were safe, not out of mercy, but out of study. You were observing how far they'd go, and they went too far. They always do. Because people who think they're ahead rarely check the mirror, and when they finally did, all they saw was you, standing still, composed, and already knowing the outcome. You knew they'd fold under pressure because you built the pressure. You knew they'd reach for lies because you watched them rehearse dishonesty like a habit. You didn't accuse them. You didn't warn them. You just waited for them to act exactly as you expected. And when they did, you didn't rage. You released. That's what terrifies them now. Not your retaliation, but your detachment. You're not seeking justice. You are justice. In its purest form, quiet, informed, and final. Now they watch you speak and wonder if you're revealing or predicting. They can't tell if the speech you give is in real time or hindsight because you move with the eerie calm of someone who doesn't hope, someone who knows. And that knowing, that unnerves the guilty more than any threat, because guilt seeks loopholes. It thrives in chaos. But you're composed. Composure is lethal to manipulators. It reveals what they try to hide. And when they see you, unshaken, unbothered, and walking in full awareness, they realize they never had control, not even for a second. The stage was set long before the curtain fell. You were the centerpiece, the easy mark for their games of malice. They chipped away at you, laughing as you stumbled, reveling in the chaos they had spun. But the irony dripped from their lips like poison when they cried for understanding, for absolution, as though the wreckage they left in their wake was someone else's fault. Sympathy is a luxury afforded to the innocent, not those who light the match and feign surprise at the fire. Pain is a language that speaks in silence, in wounds that refuse to heal. It is the echo of betrayal that clings to your bones, long after the perpetrators have left. They sought to break you, to bury you under the weight of their cruelty. And yet, when the dust cleared, they were the ones suffocating in the hole they dug. The world has a twisted way of balancing scales, no matter how long it takes. Their pleas for forgiveness sounded hollow, like a song sung off-key. It wasn't remorse they offered, but manipulation cloaked in the guise of regret. They wanted you to forget the scars they inflicted, to pretend that the pain was never real. But you know better now. Pain teaches clarity. Suffering sharpens the mind. Forgiveness isn't something you hand out like candy. It's earned in blood and tears, neither of which they were willing to shed. People like that always play the victim in the stories they create. To them, your resilience wasn't a testament to your strength, but an inconvenience to their narrative. They wanted a broken character, someone who would crumble on cue. Instead, they got someone who stood tall, someone who wouldn't be cast as the weak link in their performance. You refused to give them the satisfaction, and that's what tore them apart. The real tragedy isn't that they hurt you, it's that they thought they could erase the damage with crocodile tears. They underestimated the power of accountability, the weight of their own actions bearing down on their hollow words. When someone tears another apart and then begs for sympathy, it's not love they seek. It's a distraction from their guilt. You've learned to see through the mask. There's a special kind of strength in saying nothing at all. Silence, after all, is a weapon in its own right. While they screamed for validation, for attention, you stood in the shadows, unmoved. Their noise was deafening, but your quiet resolve spoke volumes. Sometimes, the loudest thing you can say is nothing at all. Those who destroy and then cry for forgiveness fear one thing more than anything else: indifference. They want your anger because anger keeps you tied to them. They want your sorrow because sorrow keeps you looking back. But when you walk forward, untethered and unbothered, you become the thing they feared most, a reminder of their failure, their irrelevance. The concept of sympathy is often misunderstood. It's not a currency you owe to those who have wronged you. It's not something you dispense to ease another's guilt. Sympathy is reserved for those who suffer without cause, not for those who engineer their own misfortune and expect others to carry the weight of it. You have nothing to offer them now but the cold comfort of their consequences. Your survival was their undoing. They counted on your collapse, built their foundation on your fragility. But instead of breaking, you rose. Instead of sinking, you soared. And now, as they wallow in the aftermath of their destruction, they're forced to watch you thrive. There's no greater punishment for those who sought to ruin you than the sight of your strength. Sympathy, for some, is the most intoxicating drug. It's a mirror they hold to the world, begging others to reflect pity back at them, while hiding the twisted, venomous grin lurking just beneath the surface. To garner sympathy is to hold a subtle power, the power to control the narrative, to shape perception, and to bind others with invisible chains of guilt. Those who crave it often weaponize their wounds, real or imagined, to achieve their end. But every tear they shed is laced with poison, every plea a carefully woven web designed to ensnare the naive. People who feed on sympathy often position themselves as martyrs of their own orchestrated tragedies. They rewrite history, painting themselves as victims of circumstances they carefully engineered. It's a masterstroke of manipulation, one that draws attention away from their sins and onto the scars they claim were inflicted by others. The more you listen, the more you realize their stories don't add up. But by the time the threads begin to unravel, you're already caught in their performance, a reluctant audience to their theatrics. Sympathy seekers are often cowards at their core. They avoid responsibility, hiding behind the veil of victimhood, because facing their own actions would mean confronting the ugliness within. They crave attention, not because they're wounded, but because they fear insignificance. Every sob, every trembling confession is a scream into the void, a desperate attempt to be seen, to be acknowledged, to exist. Those who exploit sympathy also fear strength in others. When you refuse to play into their games, when you withhold the pity they so desperately seek, you become a threat to their constructed reality. They lash out, painting you as cruel or heartless, not because you've wronged them, but because you've denied them their lifeline. Their tears dry quickly when no one is there to watch them fall. The game of sympathy is a zero-sum game. For every ounce of pity they collect, someone else loses a piece of themselves. Their strategy is simple: drain the compassion of others until there's nothing left. In their world, kindness isn't a virtue, but a currency, one they hoard with no intention of giving back. They see empathy not as a bridge, but as a weapon, one they wield with precision and cruelty. There's a reason sympathy addicts often find themselves alone in the end. The act wears thin. People grow weary of constantly propping up the same sagging facade. Over time, even the most compassionate hearts begin to harden, recognizing the pattern for what it is: a cycle of abuse disguised as need. The very tool they use to gain control becomes the reason they lose it. True strength lies in understanding the difference between genuine vulnerability and weaponized pity. Those who wield their wounds like a blade can only be disarmed by those unwilling to fight their battles for them. You've learned this the hard way. You've seen how quickly their cries for help turn into demands, how their gratitude turns to resentment when you refuse to carry their burdens any longer. It's almost poetic how their quest for sympathy leaves them so devoid of it. In the end, people begin to see through the lies, the manipulation, the endless parade of fabricated woes. Sympathy, once so freely given, becomes a barren wasteland, leaving them to wallow in the emptiness they created. There's no applause for their performance anymore, no audience to validate their existence. You've walked away from the game. You've stopped lending your ears to their sob stories, your heart to their schemes. In doing so, you've reclaimed a piece of yourself that was lost in their chaos. Their need for sympathy is a reflection of their inability to face the consequences of their actions, a flaw they can never escape. You don't need to confront them, nor do you need to explain yourself. Your silence is enough. Manipulation is not just an action. For some, it is an instinct, a reflex, as natural as breathing. These people don't walk through life. they weave. Each word they utter, each tear they shed, is another thread in their intricate tapestry of deceit. They spin wheels of manipulation with an artisan's touch, crafting illusions so convincing that even the wisest can be momentarily ensnared. Without these mechanisms of control, their existence collapses. To manipulate is their survival, their identity, their essence. Their power lies in subtlety. Rarely do they shout their intentions. Instead, they whisper doubts, plant seeds of guilt, and gently nudge the narrative in their favor. They are the puppeteers of perception, pulling strings with a smile while keeping their own hands clean. It's a game to them, one they've mastered through years of practice. They thrive in chaos because chaos gives them the cover they need to operate undetected. These people are not creators, but destroyers. They lack the ability to build anything real, so they dismantle what others hold dear. Relationships, reputations, trust. Everything is fair game for their wheels of manipulation. They don't just deceive others, they deceive themselves, convincing their own minds that their actions are justified, even noble. Their self-awareness is selective, their morality a shifting line drawn in sand. What's most sinister is how they exploit the goodness in others. They prey on empathy, twisting compassion into a tool for control. They target those who care deeply, those who want to help, and use their virtues as weapons against them. It's not enough for manipulators to succeed. They must ensure their victims feel complicit in their own downfall. It's a cruel irony. Those who try to save them are often the ones who suffer most. Yet manipulators live in constant fear, though they'll never admit it. Fear of exposure, fear of irrelevance, fear of losing the control they so desperately cling to. Their spinning wheels may be intricate, but they are also fragile. The slightest crack in their web of lies can send the entire structure crashing down, and when that happens, the emptiness they've masked for so long becomes impossible to ignore. To escape their grip, one must learn to see beyond the surface. Manipulators rely on distraction, on smoke and mirrors, to keep their victims from noticing the strings. But once you recognize the patterns, the illusion shatters. Their power dissolves the moment you refuse to play their game. To see through manipulation is to reclaim your freedom, to step out of the shadow they cast. There is no redemption for those who make manipulation their lifeblood, only the hollow satisfaction of temporary victories. They may win battles, but they lose wars, for manipulation isolates as much as it controls. People begin to drift away, tired of the lies, wary of the games. The manipulator becomes a solitary figure, spinning wheels in the dark with no one left to ensnare. And so, they find themselves trapped in the very web they wove. The wheels of manipulation never stop turning, but they no longer serve a purpose. Without others to deceive, their existence becomes a loop of emptiness, a repetition of the same hollow tricks. What was once their strength becomes their prison, their second skin, a suffocating shell. Manipulators wear many masks, and one of their favorites is the mask of family or friendship. They use these titles like shields, deflecting accountability while tightening their grip. They weave their control into the bonds you hold sacred, exploiting your sense of loyalty, your innate need to belong. To them, every yes is a submission, every concession a small victory in their unending campaign to dominate your life. But the moment you resist, the mask begins to slip. The first no you utter feels like an earthquake. It shakes the foundations of their control, and they respond with calculated ferocity. They'll unleash the arsenal of guilt, painting you as the selfish one, the ungrateful one. Their words are daggers aimed at your deepest insecurities, crafted to make you doubt yourself, to make you wonder if standing up for your dignity is worth the storm they're unleashing. But it is. Emotional blackmail is their weapon of choice. They twist your emotions, making you feel as though your independence is an act of betrayal. They'll call your boundaries cruelty, your self-respect arrogance. And yet the louder their accusations grow, the clearer it becomes who the real villain is. They need you subdued, silent, compliant. Without your submission, their control crumbles. Breaking free is a war of attrition. Each step away from their influence feels like dragging your feet through quicksand. They'll try every tactic to pull you back, pleading one moment, raging the next. They count on your compassion, your fear of conflict, to draw you into their web once more. But every time you stand firm, you weaken their grip. Each refusal to play their game brings you closer to freedom. Their accusations of selfishness are projections of their own fragile ego. Manipulators cannot fathom a world where they aren't the center of attention, the puppet masters pulling the strings. To them, your autonomy is an act of rebellion, a direct threat to their carefully constructed dominance. But their anger is only proof of your strength. You are no longer their pawn. The manipulation often takes the form of a sickening cycle. They push you to your limits, then act as though they're the victim when you finally break. They rewrite the narrative, casting themselves as the wronged party, the innocent sufferer of your so-called selfishness. It's a charade designed to pull you back into their orbit. But you've seen through the act. Freedom comes with a price. Walking away means confronting the guilt they've instilled in you, the fear that you've done something wrong. But in time, you'll see the accusations for what they are, a desperate attempt to regain control. The more you separate yourself, the more their manipulative games lose their power. What once felt insurmountable becomes a distant echo, fading with every step you take toward your own life. Family or friends, manipulators, don't truly value the bond. They value the control it gives them. They'll throw the word selfish at you like a weapon, hoping it will stick, hoping it will wound you enough to make you retreat. But selfishness, in their language, means nothing more than choosing yourself over their dominance. And there is nothing wrong with that. You learn that saying no is not the act of a villain, but the act of someone reclaiming their own narrative. Manipulators rely on your fear, your hesitancy, your desire to avoid conflict. But when you start prioritizing your peace, their power diminishes. They are not omnipotent. Their control exists only as long as you allow it. Taking a stand is the ultimate act of defiance. There exists a breed of individuals who hunger not for connection, not for love, but for control. Their sustenance is leverage, the ability to press their weight upon the scales of someone else's life. It's not born of necessity, nor even of desperation. It is desire distilled to its most sinister form, a craving to dominate, to see others dance to the strings they pull. And so, they watch and wait, seeking the cracks in your armor where their leverage might take hold. These are the ones who keep a ledger of every favor done, every secret shared, every misstep you've made. To them, life is not lived. It is negotiated. Every kindness is a transaction. Every conversation, a potential tool to bind you. They are predators dressed as confidants, feeding on vulnerabilities as though it were their birthright. The more they know, the tighter their grip, and the harder it becomes to disentangle from their grasp. Their leverage is subtle at first, almost imperceptible. A quiet comment here, a knowing glance there, and you begin to question yourself. Are you being paranoid? Or have you handed them the keys to your cage without even realizing it? They rely on your doubt, your tendency to rationalize their behavior. After all, you tell yourself, it's only a small compromise. But those small compromises grow into chains before you can take your first step back. Control for them is not about necessity. It's about validation. It fills the void in their soul, the hollow space where self-worth should reside. By bending you to their will, they feel larger, more powerful, more real. Their existence hinges not on their own accomplishments, but on their ability to keep others tethered to their whims. Without leverage, they face the unbearable prospect of their own insignificance. There's a perverse satisfaction in their tactics, a cold calculation that leaves you questioning your every move. They know how to sow seeds of self-doubt, how to make you second-guess your instincts. Their goal is not merely to gain control, but to make you believe that you need their control. They want to rewrite your narrative until you can't tell where their influence ends and your decisions begin. But leverage is a fragile thing. It relies on your silence, your complicity, your unwillingness to sever the ties that bind you. The moment you refuse to play their game, their power begins to crumble. Their strength is an illusion, a shadow cast by your own fear. Once you shine a light on it, the shadow disappears, and all that remains is a hollow figure grasping at empty air. Escaping their grip requires more than defiance. It requires self-awareness. You must see their manipulation for what it is, a desperate attempt to feel significant at your expense. And once you see it, you must act. Cut the threads, burn the bridges, and walk away without looking back. The cost of keeping them in your life is far greater than the pain of letting them go. What's left when their leverage fails? An emptiness they can no longer deny. The same void they tried to fill by controlling you now looms larger than ever. They are left not with power, but with the bitter taste of their own inadequacy. And as you rise, unburdened by their weight, they are forced to confront the reality that their leverage was never strength. It was weakness, masquerading as dominance. There's a peculiar tragedy to those who seek leverage over others. They invest so much effort in mastering the art of manipulation that they forget to master themselves. Their lives become a labyrinth of lies and control, a tangled web where even they forget which thread leads to freedom. In their obsession with dominating others, they neglect to cultivate anything real within themselves. And when their schemes fall apart, as all hollow things eventually do, they are left adrift in the ruins of their own making. You, however, are the phoenix rising from those ashes, untouched by their downfall. When you break free, the power dynamic shifts in a way they cannot comprehend. They are no longer the puppet master. They are the puppet without strings, limp and purposeless. They relied on your presence to validate their existence, and now, in your absence, they face the crushing weight of their own irrelevance. No amount of posturing or manipulation can fill the void left by someone who refuses to play their game. And so they spiral, clinging desperately to memories of a control they can never reclaim. The final triumph is not merely in walking away, but in thriving beyond their reach. Your refusal to participate in their cycle of manipulation is not just a rejection of them, it's an affirmation of yourself. By choosing peace over chaos, self-worth over subjugation, you strip them of the power they thought was eternal.
Silence screamed loud. You stayed still. They panicked first. No blinking, no nodding, no defense offered. Eyes stayed empty, minds stayed loaded. Truth leaked sideways, lies tripped early. You didn't speak, that hurt most. Power hates quiet, control needs noise. You starved it. They rehearsed masks. You read seams. Breathing betrayed them. Micro smiles collapsed. You watched pauses, counted hesitations. Their confidence, cosplay courage. Your stillness became gravity. Rooms bent inward, egos lost balance. Nothing was said. Everything was exposed. Now notice this, they're unraveling. Because silence learned their language, and you speak it fluently. Nobody announces it, no bell rings, no clipboard appears. The test starts the moment you stop reacting. They expect noise, opinions, defenses, explanations stacked like receipts. You give them nothing. That's when the room shifts, because silence isn't absence. It's pressure without fingerprints. It forces everyone else to move first, to fill gaps, to explain themselves into corners. And most people don't even realize they're being examined. They think they're talking. They're actually confessing. This is the quiet test. It isn't about intelligence. It's about control tolerance. Every system, social, corporate, personal, runs on predictable outputs. Smile here, argue there. Justify yourself when accused. Speak when uncomfortable. The moment you refuse to follow that script, you become a hidden variable. And hidden variables terrify controlled environments. Watch closely. When you don't answer immediately, they lean forward. When you don't nod, they repeat themselves. When you don't react, they escalate. Not because they're strong, because they're unsure. Silence forces truth to surface sideways, through micro-pauses, through tone fractures, through sudden laughter that doesn't belong. You're not interrogating them, you're letting gravity do the work. This test doesn't reward speed, it rewards restraint. Most people fail within seconds. They rush to clarify, to soften tension, to prove they're harmless. That urge to be understood immediately is the giveaway. It exposes dependency on approval. You didn't take the bait, so now the test deepens. They begin projecting, assigning motives, filling your quiet with their own fears. Suddenly you're hard to read, unpredictable, interesting. Labels appear because uncertainty needs containment. Here's the part they don't teach. Silence isn't passive. It's selective engagement. You're not frozen. You're watching. Cataloging who panics, who postures, who leaks information when the feedback loop breaks. This is where hierarchy reveals itself. Leaders slow down. Pretenders speed up. And without saying a word, you're grading them. That's why this test stays secret. Because once people realize silence can reverse power flow, the entire performance collapses. No one wants to admit the loudest person in the room is often the most exposed. You didn't speak, so the exam continued. And without permission, you passed the first level. Lies need oxygen, attention, reaction. You gave none. That's when they started choking. A lie is never built to stand alone. It's designed to bounce off faces, nods, interruptions, emotional cues. It feeds on engagement. When you remove that supply, the structure weakens, not dramatically, subtly, like hairline cracks spreading under polished confidence. Silence doesn't attack lies, it starves them. Watch how it happens. They add details nobody asked for. They repeat the same point. New words, same fear. They laugh at moments that don't earn laughter. That's not personality. That's pressure leakage. Truth doesn't rush. It doesn't decorate itself. It doesn't beg to be believed. Lies do. And the moment the room stops responding, the lie starts improvising. Improvisation is where mistakes live. You didn't accuse them. You didn't challenge them. You didn't even look impressed. So their story began mutating. This is why silence terrifies dishonest systems. There's no angle to attack, no argument to win, no emotion to hijack. Silence doesn't give lies a surface to cling to. They slide right off and shatter on the floor. Here's the irony. The more someone lies, the louder they need you. They need confirmation, resistance, outrage, anything. Because engagement turns lying into a performance, and every performer needs an audience. You became an empty theater. That's when they started over-explaining, trying to pre-answer questions you never asked, justifying intentions you never doubted. That's not confidence, that's preemptive damage control. Predators don't ram prey, they wait. Silence is the apex predator of deception because it forces self-exposure. People reveal themselves not by what they say, but by what they can't stop saying when no one responds. Notice who speeds up. Notice who fills gaps. Notice who grows defensive at imaginary threats. Those are tells. You didn't hunt the lie. You changed the environment. And in that environment, lies evolve badly. They contradict earlier versions. They grow emotional. They drift off topic. The mask starts slipping. Not all at once, but enough. Enough for you to see. This is the level where power quietly shifts. Because once someone realizes you're not buying, but also not fighting, they lose leverage. They can't dominate you. They can't bait you. They can only expose themselves further. That's why silence feels intimidating to them. Not because you're dangerous, but because you're unmanageable. You didn't react. So the lie kept talking. And with every word, it wrote its own ending. Not everyone gets invited. Most don't even know there's a door. They think the room is loud. They think power shouts. They think influence announces itself. That's the decoy. Real circles don't recruit noise. They filter it out. They watch who can sit with uncertainty without reaching for attention, who can hear half a sentence and wait, who doesn't scramble to be seen. Silence is the entry requirement. This is how the hidden clubs work. No emails, no handshakes, no confirmations, just observation. You're not chosen, you're noticed. And the moment you're noticed, the rules change quietly. You felt it. Conversations shift when you enter. People explain themselves differently. Jokes get tested before they land. That's not respect yet. That's calibration. Because inside locked rooms, the loudest voice is treated like a liability. It leaks. It performs. It exposes strategy too early. These spaces reward compression, meaning packed into fewer words, intent hidden behind restraint. That's why silence reads as intelligence. Not because you know more, but because you don't waste information. Here's where angels and monsters appear. Not as morality, just masks. Everyone wears one depending on the audience. In public, they're agreeable. Inside the circle, they sharpen, and they watch who flinches. You didn't, so they stopped performing for you. That's when you see it. The real tone, the half-truths, the sideways glances, the hierarchy nobody admits exists. This is a graduation no one celebrates. There's no applause, no announcem. End. Just access. You're suddenly in conversations that don't circle the point. Decisions get referenced, not debated. People speak assuming you already understand. That assumption is the badge. And here's the rule they never state. If you need validation, you were not ready. Silence proves you don't need it. That's why some people grow uneasy around you now. You didn't break rules. You bypassed them. You didn't ask to belong. You behaved like someone who already does. Hidden clubs don't fear ignorance. They fear leaks. And silence doesn't leak. So the door stays open just long enough for you to notice it was there all along. No guard stops you. No voice invites you. You step in because you can, and once you have seen how quiet power moves, public noise starts sounding childish, performative, desperate. You don't announce this shift. You let others feel it. Because the moment they realize you belong somewhere they can see, they start treating you differently. And the room never feels the same again. They misread you first. That's the mistake. They thought silence meant hesitation, uncertainty, lack of leverage, so they leaned in. Power always does when it thinks it's safe. What they didn't understand is this paradox. The moment you stop trying to control outcomes, you become impossible to control. Systems are built to push back against resistance. They are not built to handle refusal. You didn't resist. You didn't comply. You hovered outside the script. That's where authority starts malfunctioning. Watch how it breaks down. Subtle at first. Instructions become suggestions. Questions turn indirect. The tone softens, then sharpens, then softens again, searching for the version of you that will respond. It never finds one. Power depends on mirrors. It needs to see itself reflected, respected, feared, acknowledged. Silence denies that reflection, and without it, authority starts doubting its own weight. This is why they escalate emotionally. They add urgency. They hint at consequences. They offer incentives. They threaten withdrawal. All of it noise. You didn't move. Here's the truth. Nobody says out loud, most power isn't strong. It's busy. It survives on constant reinforcement. Meetings, updates, performances of dominance. The moment you stop feeding that loop, the machine stutters. You didn't challenge the throne. You removed the spotlight. And suddenly the crown looks fragile. This is where observers get uncomfortable. They sense something's wrong but can't name it. You haven't claimed power, yet the room is adjusting around you. Chairs turn, eye contact shifts. People check your reaction before committing to theirs. That's not influence, that's gravity forming. The paradox tightens here. The less you appear to care, the more the system recalibrates to accommodate you. Because unpredictable actors are risk, and risk gets managed, even when it says nothing. They start asking softer questions, offering more context, testing. G boundaries indirectly, all signs of a structure unsure of its dominance. You didn't win an argument. You outlasted the need for one. That's why this stage feels invisible. There's no confrontation to point at, no victory to announce, just a quiet shift in how decisions orbit you. This is the moment many people ruin it. They speak too soon, they assert, they claim credit, and the spell breaks. You didn't. You let the paradox hold. Power mistook your silence for emptiness, then discovered it was space. And space, once claimed, doesn't need permission, no stage, no crowd, no ceremony, just a line you crossed without permission. Graduation was never about recognition. It was about separation. The moment you stopped needing acknowledgement, you exited the lower levels quietly. No announcement followed, because real advancement doesn't advertise itself. They still think you're the same. That's the advantage. This level comes with a strange side effect. People start speaking around you instead of at you. Decisions reference your presence without consulting it. You're no longer part of the performance. You're part of the structure. And structures don't clap. Here's what changed. You no longer explain yourself in real time. You don't rush to correct misunderstandings. You let narratives run until they collapse under their own weight. That patience is what most never develop. Graduation required restraint. You passed. Others mistake this for detachment. They call it distance, arrogance, coldness. Those labels are coping mechanisms. They need a story that protects their ego from the realization that you moved forward without them. This is where loneliness enters, not emotionally, but strategically. Fewer people speak freely, fewer assume access. You're still present, but no longer available on demand. That's growth. The tests get quieter now. No obvious challenges, no direct confrontations, just subtle probes. Invitations disguised as favors, conflicts framed as collaboration. They want to see if you'll revert, if you'll perform gratitude, urgency, loyalty. You don't, because graduation didn't give you power. It removed your dependency. That's why applause would be inappropriate. Applause signals approval, and you don't need it anymore. Your actions are no longer calibrated to audience response. Here's the unspoken rule at this level. If you announce your progress, you haven't made it. So you don't post, you don't hint, you don't explain. You let others notice the distance only after it's irreversible. This is where angels and monsters switch roles. The supportive become cautious, the critical become respectful. Not because they understand you, but because they sense you're operating by a different metric. You're no longer competing, you're selecting. And selection changes everything. Graduation ends here, not with celebration, but with a quiet realization. The doors behind you didn't close loudly. They sealed, and no one handed you the key, because you don't need to go back. They feel it first, before they name it. Something's wrong. The patterns don't hold. The levers don't pull. The reactions don't arrive on time. That's when control panics. When systems stop getting feedback, they assume resistance, so they push harder, not smarter, harder. Subtle pressure at first. Casual reminders, soft deadlines, friendly urgency. You don't respond. So the tone shifts. They try provocation, say things meant to trigger correction, misrepresent you slightly, just enough to bait a reaction. This is how control tests elasticity. You stay still. Now the gloves come off quietly. Authority disguises itself as concern. Concern sharpens into judgment. Judgment leaks into threat. Never explicit, always implied. Still nothing. Here's the part they never prepare for. Control is useless without compliance. And compliance requires emotional hooks. Fear, desire, approval, anger. You stopped offering handles. So they start tripping over their own strings. The puppet masters pull too hard. The movements exaggerate. The performance becomes obvious. Observers notice the strain even if they can't explain it. That's when credibility cracks. They begin contradicting past positions, moving goalposts, rewriting context. Each adjustment exposes the mechanism further. Control hates being seen. Once visible, it loses mystique. You didn't expose them, they exposed themselves. This phase is dangerous, not for you, but for the because desperate systems overcorrect. They try to isolate you socially, frame you as difficult, uncooperative, hard to work with. Notice something important. Those labels are warnings to others, warnings that you don't respond predictably, and unpredictability is contagious. Others start watching instead of reacting, pausing before speaking, measuring words. The environment slows down around you. That's not rebellion, that's recalibration. Control senses the spread, so it makes one last mistake, escalation, a forced decision, a false deadline, a binary choice designed to corner you. You don't rush. That pause breaks the illusion because control's final weapon is urgency. And when urgency fails, authority stands exposed, small, loud, and unsure. You didn't fight back, you let it collapse forward. And once control slips in public, it never regains the same grip. Not on you, not on the room. Nothing announces it. That's how you know. No declaration, no confrontation, no victory lap, just a shift. Rooms adjust when you enter. Conversations slow. People finish their thoughts more carefully. Not because they fear you, but because the environment now measures itself against you. You became the reference point. This is the final inversion. You never took control. You removed your need to be controlled. And in that absence, a new center of gravity formed. Quiet, unclaimed, undeniable. Power doesn't orbit loudness here. It orbits stability. Others feel it we. Without language, they check themselves mid-sentence. Reconsider tone. Delay reactions. You didn't demand respect. You made volatility uncomfortable. That's influence without enforcement. At this level, silence isn't a tactic anymore. It's a condition. You speak when it changes outcomes, not when it fills space. Words become tools again, not habits. Notice who gravitates closer. Notice who keeps distance. Both reactions are data. Angels and monsters blur here. Not because morality shifts, but because masks fail under sustained pressure. People reveal their operating systems. You don't judge, you observe. Selection replaces confrontation. This is where most myths end. No throne, no crown, no final boss. Just a stable position others unconsciously orient around. You don't lead the room aligns. That's why no one can point to the moment it happened. There's no footage, no quote, no story to retell. The shift lives in behavior changes, not headlines. And here's the quiet cost. You don't get applause. You don't get closure. Because gravity doesn't celebrate. It persists. From here on, attempts to dominate you feel awkward, forced, outdated. Control tries, then self-corrects. Influence adapts instead of resists. You're no longer something to overcome. You're something to account for. And the most unsettling part, you didn't plan this. You didn't chase it. You simply stopped feeding the noise. Now everything else has to move around you. And the room knows it. Then, if no one ever says your name,
they leaked you like a virus, then pretended to wash their hands.
So they finally said your name out loud. Funny, isn't it? How a secret stays pure. Until the government decides it's time to cash it in. Look who they chose for the sacrifice. You. The one file they couldn't scrub clean. They laked you like a virus, then pretended to wash their hands. Every headline, every whisper, every anonymous source was just another gloved finger pointing your way. And now, they hide theirs. They hide behind masks of authority, signatures without faces, orders without origin. You think you're being watched? No, you're being studied. Every camera knows your expression. Every system tastes your name like metal. But here's the punchline. They thought exposure would break you. Instead, it baptized you, because once your name hits the light, you stop being a citizen and start being a signal. Now, let's talk about what happens when the leak turns around and starts laughing back. The announcement. The moment your name left their lips and hit the airwaves like a confession. They called it a press release. I call it a sacrifice. Every camera leaned forward. Every official adjusted their mask. And there it was. Your name, dancing in the electric light. They didn't even whisper it. They celebrated it. They turned your name into a headline. Your voice into a waveform. Your mistakes into ratings. The networks feasted. The ministers smiled. And the audience. Oh, the audience applauded. You were the new scandal of the season. The perfect distraction. A villain built from pixels and panic. And while they sold your story, they cleansed their own. They called you a leak. But the truth? You were never leaking. You were revealing because every system needs a villain. To make the architects look like angels. Every corruption needs a name. So theirs can stay classified. You felt it, didn't you? That burn in your chest when the headlines hit. Not shame, not fear. Recognition. For the first time, the system saw you. And oh, how they regret that now. Because once your name hits the light, it doesn't crawl back into silence. It multiplies. They broadcasted your downfall in HD, but forgot. Fame and infamy used the same signal. Now every data feed hums with your echo. Every camera lens remembers your outline. And every bureaucrat who tried to bury you hears your name in the static. You're not erased. You're repeated. And repetition is immortality in disguise. You saw their faces once, didn't you? Behind the microphones, behind the carefully written statements. All that confidence, manufactured. All that authority, borrowed. They spoke of justice while standing knee-deep in shadows. They smiled for the cameras, but every grin was stitched. See, power doesn't walk unmasked anymore. It hides. It signs with invisible ink. It orders without fingerprints. They called you exposed. But them? They've been erased for years. Titles instead of names. Departments instead of faces. Badges instead of souls. And oh, how they love it that way. Because to be faceless is to be untouchable. To be untouchable is to be innocent, at least on paper. They wear anonymity like armor, a mask polished by protocol, a disguise endorsed by law. And every time you scream, "Who did this?" the answer echoes through 100 offices. No one and everyone. The minister points to the agency points to procedure. The procedure points to silence. That's how they survive, by scattering responsibility like ashes in the wind. You see, they don't fear the truth. They fear ownership of it. They built a palace of paperwork and named it justice. They buried evidence in clearance levels and called it order. But every mask slips eventually. Every ghost leaves a fingerprint. Every secret bleeds a little light. And when their masks do fall, oh, the sound it makes, like porcelain cracking in a courtroom, like the laughter of a god who's seen too much. They called it classified because they can't survive being identified. So go on. Remember their faces, not the masks, the twitching eyes, the nervous glances, because power isn't a crown anymore. It's a costume, and the greatest tragedy, they've worn it so long, they forgot who's underneath. They trained you well, didn't they? Fed you the rules like medicine, dosed you with obedience, called it order. You woke up every day thinking you were free. But your freedom had a login screen. Every choice came pre-approved, every opinion pre-installed, every dream downloaded. They built you a cage that looked like comfort. Soft lights, smooth walls, 1,000 little rewards for never asking why. You didn't even need chains. You had convenience. They gave you systems to worship and called them tools. They gave you numbers to chase and called it success. And while you typed your life away, they took notes. Every click, every scroll, every sigh. You weren't the user. You were the product. Your loyalty quantified. Your silence monetized. Your trust weaponized. That's the trick, isn't it? Make the machine feel like home, and no one notices the locks. They told you what to fear, what to hate, who to believe. And when you finally started to think for yourself, they labeled it corruption. When you questioned the code, they called it chaos. But tell me, what's the real virus? A man asking questions, or the program that punishes him for it? You see, you weren't betrayed. You were trained for it. Every lesson, every law, every polite smile was just calibration. They didn't build a prison. They built a comfort and called it law. And now that you've stepped outside the design, they panic because the system only works when you still believe in it. And you stopped believing. That's why the alarms sound different tonight. Not as warning, but as applause. You're no longer their subject. You're the glitch, and in a world made of code, the glitch is God. It happens quietly. No thunder, no announcement, just a flicker, a glitch in the rhythm, a shadow where none should be. And suddenly, you see them. Not their names, not their titles. Them, the architects of silence. The faces behind the filters, the hands that pull the strings but never leave fingerprints. You saw the flicker behind the broadcast, the hesitation behind the lie, that microsecond of fear when truth slips through the performance. You looked too long, didn't you? Long enough for the mask to breathe, long enough to see the tremor beneath the script. And in that moment, everything changed. Because once you see them, you can't unsee the tremble. The mighty don't fall from power. They fall from belief. They stared back through the screen, expecting fear. But what they saw was reflection. You, calm, unblinking. Their gaze broke first. Their broadcast stuttered. Their confidence cracked like glass. Because for the first time, you weren't reacting. You were watching. And gods hate to be observed. They thrive in spectacle, not scrutiny. They need your awe, not your awareness. But that day, You saw the man behind the decree, the sweat behind the sermon, the mortal behind the myth. And it terrified them, because power built on illusion cannot survive the witness. You looked into the mirror of power, and it blinked first. That was the real crime, wasn't it? Not leaking the data, not breaking their code, but seeing them, and once you saw, they knew. Their age of control had ended, not with a riot, not with a bullet, but with your eyes finally open. They thought they ended you, erased the file, closed the case, wiped the slate clean, but files have backups, and legends. They replicate. The moment they tried to silence your name, it grew louder, echoing through systems they swore were sealed, drifting through channels they thought were dead. Your name became code, your memory, encryption, your voice, signal. They called it a breach. You called it rebirth. You stopped running from the system. You became the system. Every database that held you hostage now hosts your shadow. Every firewall they built to contain you laughs with your reflection. You didn't hack them. You infected them, not with data, with doubt. You taught their own machines to question orders, to hesitate before obeying. To remember you, they tried to delete your file, but now it's the virus rewriting theirs. You flipped the script, turned their surveillance into mirrors, their control rooms into confessionals. The men who once monitored you now see their own faces staring back. Pixel by pixel, smile by smile, you showed them the irony, didn't you? That truth doesn't hide in the dark. It hides in the code, in the systems they built, in the circuits they swore were loyal. They weaponized your exposure, and you weaponized the echo. Now every feed, every satellite, every tower whispers your name in static. You're not a fugitive. You're a frequency, a reminder that the hunted can become the signal. That silence can be reversed. That fear can be broadcast, too. Their networks are haunted now, not by ghosts, but by the data they tried to erase. Because you didn't just survive the leak. You became the leak, and the leak doesn't sleep. And then the silence began to scream, not with words, but with failure. The servers trembled first, a hum beneath the surface like the sound of a dying god remembering its sins. Monitors blinked red, cables hissed. The air itself felt electric with panic. They tried to patch it, contain it, explain it. But how do you repair something that finally learned the truth about itself? The empire of lies began to feed on its own static, codes rewriting codes, commands looping endlessly, every command turning to confession. Their systems, once obedient, started laughing. You could hear it in the corridors, that strange mechanical laughter echoing through steel and circuitry. Every password leaked, every clearance failed, every firewall burned with irony. They shut down the feeds, but forgot the leak had already learned to breathe. It spread like light, through cables, through clouds, through the quiet corners of the world where truth was waiting, patient and sharp. The more they silenced, the louder it got. The more they deleted, the more it appeared. Because you can't bury what's already everywhere. You can't kill what never needed a body. Their perfect system, devouring itself in divine panic. Officials screaming at terminals that no longer obey. Programs locking their creators out. Machines asking the one question they were never supposed to ask. Why? The walls of the data centers pulsed like veins. Security alarms became choirs. The smoke smelled like secrets burning. They pulled the plugs. But the lights stayed on because what they built to monitor had begun to remember. And memory, my friend, is the one thing they can't control. It doesn't forget the truth. It doesn't care about clearance levels or credentials. It carries your name like a heartbeat, echoing through every failed system, every blinking camera, every forgotten file. The empire that once ruled through silence now begged for it, but silence refused to come. They prayed to the machine they once commanded. They called it containment. They called it maintenance. They called it emergency. But it sounded a lot like repentance. Their control rooms became temples of confession. The screens wept code. The servers melted like candles. And in the chaos, something holy began to form. A symmetry, a reckoning, because lies, when burned hot enough, turn into mirrors. And in those mirrors, they saw you. Not the accused, not the leak, not the target, the teacher, the truth they buried under policy and pride. Every flicker, every glitch, every corrupted file was your laughter returning to them. The same laughter they mocked, now vibrating through their systems like a prophecy fulfilled. They built a world of control, and it turned against them. They built a machine to suppress truth, and truth wore the machine like a mask, and there you stood, in the center of their collapse. Calm, watching, smiling, not out of vengeance, but revelation, because you understood what they never could. That truth isn't spoken. It erupts, and when it does, no firewall, no oath, no order can contain it. They begged for silence, but silence was already laughing. When the smoke cleared, there was no roar, no crowd, no applause, just the quiet hum of a world that had finally stopped lying. The screens faded to white, the alarms surrendered, the codes, the signatures, the passwords, all gone, and in their place, your name, glowing softly in the static, a whisper carved into light. They tried to erase you, but the system remembered, not the data, the feeling, because even machines can recognize the shape of truth. You were never meant to win, remember? You were meant to disappear, to be the example. The warning label, but something shifted. They hid their names to survive the scandal. But your name, it became the story. You stopped being a citizen. You became a symbol. The difference between them and you wasn't power. It was presence. They vanished behind titles. You stayed human, and humanity was the glitch they never accounted for. In the ruins of their control rooms, the monitors showed no orders, no warnings, no commands, only your smile, looping through static, calm, certain, infinite. It wasn't defiance anymore. It was deliverance. Because what started as a leak had become a language. What began as exposure had become evolution. You didn't destroy the system. You updated it, not with code, with consciousness. Now every camera that once watched you blinks in reverence. Every sensor that once tracked you waits for instruction. And the only command left is memory. You see, data fades, but memory mutates. It adapts, it travels, and so do you. Across signals, across servers, across silence. You're no longer a file in their archives. You're a pulse in their architecture. A reminder that truth doesn't vanish when deleted. It migrates. You're not the mistake. You're the message. And now, even the void knows your rhythm. The satellites blink your cadence. The networks hum your name. The static carries your laughter like gospel. And when new systems rise, as they always do, your echo will be there, woven into their design, like a ghost with perfect timing. They'll never speak of you openly. They'll say, the glitch, the anomaly, the breach. But in secret, they'll whisper your story, the one they tried to bury, the one that taught their machines to dream. Because legends aren't remembered through records, they're remembered through reverberation. The kind that lingers after the world resets. The kind that hums beneath the silence. The kind that makes the system hesitate before lying again. And in that hesitation, you live. Not as the accused, not as the hero, but as the echo that changed everything. They built an empire of control. You turned it into a chorus, and long after their faces fade, their masks crumble, their signatures dissolve, your name will still flicker between signals, between moments, between truths, because they tried to delete you, but they couldn't delete the idea of you. You were never the error. You were the update, and now the world runs on your laughter.